So even with the sex scenes and the romance and it has, at the end of the day, nothing to do with me personally, because I'm not writing those stories as myself or even for myself. When I write Galilee and Lucifer and Son of the Morning, I'm writing for them. So I don't need to think about like my feelings. I'm not attracted to them. They are attracted to each other. It's a bit like shapeshifting, I think. I slip into their skin and I write for them and they tell me how it feels and I transcribe it. Even if I'm personally like, ugh, fluids, bodily
Stop.
fluids.
That's so amazing.
But they're like, fluids, bodily fluids. And I'm just like, sure,
Oh my
okay.
God.
I'll write it the way you want me to write it.
Welcome to Stars and Stars with Issa. This is the show where we look to the stars above with the stars below. I'm Issa Nakazawa, your host and resident astrologer. In today's episode, I chat with New York Times bestselling author and artist Akwaeke Emezi. Akwaeke just released their latest novel, Son of the Morning, a paranormal gothic romance set in the Black South. As with much of Akwaeke's previous work, their new book explores themes of divinity and transformation, a characteristic of their Scorpio rising. Remember, Scorpio energy is all about uncovering the unseen and hidden truths of our world. And with Akwaeke's Gemini Sun and Libra Moon shining in the houses of the dream world, they're especially gifted at bridging our everyday reality to other spiritual realms. In our conversation, Akwaeke talks about the indigenous influences in their work, the multiple selves they embody, and how they approach sex scene writing in their craft. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. How are you, Akwaeke? Welcome to Stars and Stars.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this.
I'm just thrilled by your work. And like I was telling everyone, I'm no spoilers because we care about your listeners, but this one is so sexy. And we're going to talk about intimacy and the erotic today. But yeah, kudos on writing a book that actually turned me on. I was like, wow, I never thought this was possible. I wonder if we can start with you telling me a little bit, just broadly, about your relationship to astrology and cosmology.
I'm so curious. I think so much of my work has been autobiographical and specifically like spiritually autobiographical. There's a quote that floats around. I cannot remember who to accredit it to, but basically about being your own favorite subject. That's how I felt, where I'm like, no shade, I am the most interesting person to me. And I like to dig into it, and I like to use different tools to kind of dig into this like exploration of self, to kind of understand this embodiment, this existence, which I think has been fundamentally a very perplexing thing for me since I was a child. Like I'm just like, I don't get it. Why am I here? What are we doing? This is a mess. And I find that astrology and cosmology are like one of the tools that I like to use more so in talking with other people who are like real nerds about it, because I'm not actually an astro nerd. It gets confusing. I'm like, this
Yes.
is scholarship. Like we're talking planets, houses. I'm like, sweetie, I just
Sweetie, I simply can't.
I'm like, I do
simply
not
can't.
understand what's happening, but I trust the other person to translate it for me.
Yeah. I do want to share your big three so that listeners can get a glimpse of why you are the way you are. So you are a curious Gemini sun, a charming Libra moon, and a magnetic Scorpio rising, which is so apt for you. I get so excited about Scorpio risings because I always tell this anecdote, but for the first season, it was so hard for me to get a Scorpio rising. And I found that
Really?
so delightful because Scorpio risings are hard to get. And
Ha!
I was like, I love when the stars are like playing with me.
You're like, this is very on brand. I'm not even mad at it.
Yeah, so we ended the season with 3 in a row. I was like, oh, the finale. And so we begin with your Scorpio rising. When you think of Scorpio, what just like pops up in your mind? No wrong answers, just like free associating.
Sharp.
Sharp. Oh, yes. That, yeah. Anything else?
No, it's like sharp. I see claws.
Oh,
for some
these are good.
reason. I have no idea why.
No one ever says sharp. And I love that because every sign has a modality, and that modality is really important because it tells us how each sign maneuvers. And Scorpio is a fixed sign. So even though
Mm.
it's water, which people think of water always as fluid, but water takes infinite forms, and one of them is
Yeah.
ice.
Icicles.
Right. Scorpio has that. Sorry, sometimes I've just been watching so many of your interviews and I see so much of your like Libra and Taurus Venus. You're always like giggling and so sweet. I'm like, I can't. And so Scorpio has that fixity. So I really like that we're starting with sharp because that is a word that a lot of astrologers use to describe Scorpio risings. But there's also just this overall theme of transformation and like a real familiarity and fluency in the language of death and rebirth. And that's figurative and it's literal, but like a Scorpio rising's life is marked by many transformations. And it's not uncommon to meet a Scorpio rising and feel like you're meeting 15 different people throughout your lifetime.
It's so funny because so much of what you're saying is literally what was happening with my debut novel. I wrote Freshwater literally 10 years ago. Like I started writing it, well, 11 years ago in 2014. And it was a spiritual autobiography where I was kind of looking at my life through the lens of indigenous Igbo reality because I looked at my life through the lens of like Western psychotherapy. It hadn't helped my suicidality. I looked at it through like Christianity. None of that was helping. And I kept getting this spiritual pull to look at it through an indigenous lens. So I went like pre-conception
Wow.
and interviewed my parents and then wrote the whole book from not even my perspective, but the perspective of multiple spirits that were living inside me. And much later, someone was like, that is a dissociative identity disorder. And I was like, fun fact, um, probably right. But a lot of what the work was about moving the center away from the West into an indigenous reality and acknowledging that like multiple realities exist at once. So in this reality, it can have this name. And in this other reality, it doesn't have that name. But when I was doing, the press rounds for it, and it was my first time, it was my first book. So I was doing like NPR and all these interviews and arguing with people because I was like, they were like, oh, it's a book about mental health. It's a metaphor for mental health. And I was like, it's not a metaphor for mental health. It's about a book about an Igbo spirit child. It's based in this indigenous culture. We're going to talk about it from the center of this indigenous culture. And I was moving on a principle that Toni Morrison had talked about in one of her interviews where she said, I stood at the border, the margins, I claimed it as center, and I let the rest of the world move over. So the center I was claiming was that indigenous realities and spiritualities and cosmologies are real. They are valid. They are not superstition. They are not make-believe. They are like real, valid, and true.
Hmm.
A lot of Freshwater was about me walking this line, which a former friend had once described as, she said, you are like on the line between being alive and being dead. It's actually really kind of scary to see. She's like, and it was the first time we'd ever met, but she said that. And being a spirit child in that cosmology is being a child who's born to die. So much of my work also is around death and walking that line. And it seems to sink in so well to what you're talking about.
I know even your Instagram handle is Young Dead Thing. I was like, could this
Yes.
write itself? That was so gorgeous. Thank you. And because I think sometimes there is an assumption that we just come to our own inherited spiritual frameworks with like an ease. And I actually don't relate to that. Like for me, there was a struggle. And that is very scorpionic and it's very Martian. It's ruled by Mars. Mars is a planet that in the traditional astrology system is known as a malefic, meaning there is a charge to Scorpio risings. There is an investigation, and that investigation is not about ease. It's about like leaning into the edges and leaning into the sharp places. So I would love to know like what that actually, like what compelled you to start to actually empower yourself to be like, this therapy is not working. Like, I don't know, there's a certain kind of scorpionic claiming of like, these are not speaking to me. And I'm going to go deeper and talk directly to my parents about what other modes of knowing and being exist.
To be honest, my parents were not really involved in that process. I interviewed
Yeah.
them for the book. They didn't know what kind of book I was writing.
Mm,
They were not aware that it was any kind of spiritual thing. They did not provide any spiritual leadership. But part of it is also because in my personal ontology, they actually aren't my parents. They're kind of like they're like I write a lot about my biological mom basically being a surrogate for the deity that is my mother. And,
yeah.
in my poetry collection, I wrote a lot about that, what it's like to be a god surrogate and how upsetting it must be to be a god surrogate and have this child that really has nothing to do with you and feels very alienated for you and does not really identify as your child. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like,
Wow.
obviously, I gave birth to you. Also, my mom is also a Gemini. Also, I believe with a Scorpio rising.
Okay. Now we're getting somewhere.
I interviewed my dad for the book, and he is an Aquarius. That's the only thing I know about him. And he was like, I asked him what he remembered of my childhood, and he was like, well, yeah, you were loud and you read a lot. And then I asked him about when he went to the USSR for medical school. And this man goes, it was December 25th, 1965. I
That's how
stepped
my
out of the
dad is.
plane and the ice crunched under my feet. And I was like,
Wow.
they're
Ex-
hilarious. But I think for me, it was honestly, I would call it a spiritual calling. And I
yeah.
mean spiritual calling where it's like you get dragged kicking and screaming by
Yeah.
your ankle. And it was like your life will not know peace until you follow that compulsion to go deep, to look in places. I did not want to do it at all. I had been raised Catholic. And when I say Catholic, I mean very Catholic. There are Carmelite nuns in my mother's family. My mom's Malaysian, and my grandmother's brother was the Archbishop of Kuala Lumpur. So very, very Catholic.
Again, not a metaphor, everybody. Direct lived experience.
Direct lived experience. And so when I started getting pulled to like, this traditional religion, this indigenous culture that I was not raised in, that is considered still evil and taboo and like very forbidden back home, I was not happy about it. I thought that it meant I was going to go insane.
And you've also talked a little bit about, and this is starting to get us towards the Gemini a little bit, but how storytelling in childhood became this kind of like, and imagination, I'm sure, is part of that, became this space, this like generative space for you and your sister when you were navigating some difficult realities. Can you tell me a little bit, like teleport us back to that time in your life and like what was that? How was imagination that place, that generative place for you?
I was born in Umuahia, which is the capital of one of the southern states in Nigeria. And I was raised an hour outside in a different town called Aba. And I grew up there until I finished high school, basically the equivalent. So I didn't leave Nigeria until I was leaving for college. And for most of my childhood, Nigeria was under a military dictatorship. The town I lived in was incredibly violent, like to the point where I'm still unpacking it, I think, in therapy because it was so violent, but it was so normalized because I didn't know anything else. So it wasn't until at some point you're like telling someone a story and then you see like the shock and horror
Right.
on their face when you're like, oh yeah, and they would lynch people quite regularly and that they would dump the corpses at the intersection and we would see dead bodies every day on our way to school and you would see corpses stacked up outside the hospital on your way to church. And that was just all the things that were happening outside my
Right. Not
house,
even inside your house.
not even inside. So, my dad's a doctor. My best friend's dad was a doctor as well. And they would say, oh, in those days when we had the days off from school or they robbed the hospital and, they assaulted the nurses. And these were the stories that we were hearing, normally as kids and understanding that like, oh, this was a thing that could happen. Like someone could break into your house and rape you. And like these are things that were happening to the women in the town. These are things that were happening throughout the whole childhood. And then meanwhile, my sister and I, and my brother as well, I think actually when he was younger, are reading like Enid Blyton novels that my mom had got from London. And so we believed in magic completely, fully, utterly. It was not even a question. We believed that there were pixies in our backyard. We would play with our Barbie dolls and we would play to an imaginary audience of fairies.
The most important audience.
Exactly. It would be like we were holding like a little play with the Barbies, and whenever we needed to like stop to go pee or something, it would be like intermission for the fairies. And for years, I used to describe myself as having an idyllic childhood. Like I used to be like, oh, I had a great childhood. You know, we believed in fairies and we played in meadows and blah, 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 blah. And just everything else was just removed. And that's the dissociation, that I'm talking about, where you just snip that part out and put it to one side because a child's brain, like there was so much trauma that a child's brain couldn't actually cope with it.
And your brain is protecting you in a way.
Even like as I tell it, I'm like, this sounds like a movie. This sounds like a book. This sounds like something else. So I think what I'm trying to say is like at that point, at that age, when possibility is so wide, even in the most horrific directions, you understand that anything is possible. And I think that that is a useful kind of flexibility for the mind, because even now in the US, people are having such trouble coming to terms with things. And I'm just like, oh, because your mind hasn't been stretched that far. You don't think those things are possible. I've known those things are possible since I was a toddler because I saw them. So when people are having trouble reckoning with massacres and genocides and a government that wants to kill you, and I'm just like, yeah, welcome to the rest of the world. This is what truth is. This is what reality is. This is what humanity is. Like, it's surprising to me, and maybe not surprising, but there's a part of me that's like, wow, to have the privilege of learning that so late in life.
I think something that's really beautiful about the way your work sits with me is that it feels like fleshly, like the word becomes flesh. Like there is a flesh to the places you create. And I'm wondering if that started young, where like in the midst of all of this violence, like the places you were going in the stories that you were reading, and then eventually the stories that you were writing, there is kind of like a fleshiness to them where it's like I'm actually inhabiting these places and they're becoming places for me to belong to. Even if you also feel an identification with where you're physically at, this space of our imagination is actually tangible in a sense.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's always felt tangible. Like I can see it. So whenever I'm writing my books, a lot of the time they feel real because I'm transcribing an experience that I'm having. So I'm in the world. I can look around like the room I'm writing and find all the details, and then I just write it down. But it's playing like a movie in my head. It's immersive in my head. So then the difficulty is translating that immersive experience to the page in a way that when someone picks it up, they can get immersed and it can play like a movie in their heads as well. And it's almost translation in a way, where I'm translating from one form to another to another.
Your sun is in Gemini, and Gemini is the sign of the translator.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's also the sign of siblings. So there's just so many things that we're talking about. But both your luminaries, your sun and your moon, are shining in the houses of the dream world. Both of your sun is in the 8th house, that's the Scorpio house. So you have more Scorpio, but it's the house of the unseen, the hidden realms, and another house of transformation. And then your moon, which is in Libra. So both Gemini and Libra are air signs, and they're signs of curiosity and connection and storytelling. Your Libra moon, is in the 12th house, which is the Pisces house. It's kind of like the technology of dreams. We don't really emphasize that the moon is describing your physical body. And wherever planets are in the 12th house creates a blind spot. It creates a blindness. And so it's interesting when you have your body in the 12th, there's this doubling effect where you can go through life in various moments struggling with embodiment, because embodiment is something that you don't necessarily need to feel through your body to feel it because it's in the 12th. So your dreams can feel truer than your reality, or you can sublimate
That's so
experiences.
cool.
When you have the 8th and the 12th, you actually can become a channel. So you can
Mm.
actually, especially when your Gemini is there and your Libra is there, what it really means is you can translate these liminal dreams or these kind of waking dreams into something that connects to people who might not have that clairvoyance, right? It's like you're languaging these worlds that are actually not languageable. And that sounds crazy, but it's like you're putting language to these liminal spaces that for you might actually feel extremely real, and then your gift is making them feel real to the reader.
I love that so much because yes, one of my good friends and I, we always talk about how disappointing it is to wake up in this realm
Yes.
because the dreams feel literally, I've said, I'm like, it's more real. I had a friend in the last year who was like, hey, you know you're psychic, right? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? And she was like,
Are you being cheeky or you really don't know?
I did not know.
Okay, because your
I
whole
honestly
chart's
did
like,
not.
I'm psychic.
But when I look back, I used to write children's books when I was a child.
What haven't you done?
That's okay. I'm trying to find out. It's like process of elimination. It's like, what can't I do? I will find out when I get
You're going
to
to come
it.
out with a cookbook in 30 minutes. Like, I can't keep up. Like,
But I had a third person bio
Okay.
written at the back of one of those books, and I wrote it when I was like 7. And I went by my middle name for most of my childhood. Like, I actually didn't know Akwaeke was my first name until I was 16.
What happened at 16?
I was applying to college, and my mom was like, you're writing your name wrong. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you're writing your name backwards. And I was like, it's not backwards. And she's like, yeah, it is. Akwaeke is not your middle name. It's your first name. And my middle name is Zara. And that's what everyone had called me my whole life. And she's like, that's not your first name. That's your middle name.
16 is old.
Yes. Yes. I was very fucked up my identity for a
I'd be
little
like,
bit. I was just like,
Mom?
who am I?
A couple
Who have you even been calling me?
questions? What is the
But
meaning
I
of Akwaeke? But okay, sorry,
It means python's egg.
Okay. Interview
Yeah,
over.
We'll get to that.
Peace out. Good luck. Python's egg. Jeez. You are
Yeah,
the most
and-
interesting person alive.
And Zara is short for Chizara, which means God answered, because my dad said that he prayed for me and I showed up. The python is also one of the physical manifestations of the most powerful Igbo deity, Allah, who has the underworld in her womb.
Okay. Good night,
Yes.
everybody.
But I have this little third person bio that I put at one of the back of the children's books. And obviously I was using she, her pronouns at the time because
Yeah.
I was a baby who did not know that I was
Stop.
trans.
Yeah.
And it says about the author, and then it's underlined. Miss Zara Emezi was 7 years old when she wrote this book. Her ambition is to be a world-famous author and artist. She has a family of 5 and loves art and books. Her hobby is writing.
Okay, icon in the making. When they're not reading to fairies and asking their permission to go to the bathroom.
They're prophesying their career 30 years ahead of time.
Octavia Butler did it. We saw those notes.
Real.
Octavia was like, I am the shit. I will be. And you're like, okay, cool. Conjuring. We're spellcasting.
And the world was like, yes.
I receive.
Fair enough.
God has changed.
Fair enough.
I have some similarities to your chart. And I think something that I was curious about, especially in the writing of The Son of the Morning with some of the sex scenes, because so much of your chart is also erotic and deeply sensual and magnetic. Like, I am curious how that's operated. And maybe we can just drop into the present, how it's currently operating in your life. Where do the lived experiences that you're going through like support the writing, or is there a certain sublimation of the erotic in the writing itself? Like, is your creative process one of your primary erotics, or is it like the actual experiences of intimacy in your lived life feed the stories and then it goes back and forth and they're just kind of mutually supporting each other?
To answer this, I actually have to go back to the book Freshwater. So one of the things about Freshwater is that if we're using Western, psychotherapy terms, I do have DID, which is basically when your psyche splinters at the time of a great trauma and creates another persona. It starts very young Like diagnostically, the first one had to have happened, I think, prior to the age of 9 or
Wow.
prior to the age of 6, like very, very young. My last psychologist was a specialist in it, and she was like, look, she's like, I need you to understand that the kind of trauma that creates this is not, it's not like, oh, something bad happened.
Right.
She was like, it is extreme. Something extremely terrible happened to you. I don't remember what it is. And they don't, in therapy, they don't try to make you remember either because it's not helpful. But in Freshwater, I write about the moment when one of the personas was created, which is when I was raped by my college boyfriend. And I had actually been asexual prior to that. And then that assault happened and I became someone else. Literally for the next couple of years, I was a different person. And that person was unsurprisingly hypersexual as a result of the trauma. It was kind of depressing because I'm also a survivor of child sexual abuse.
Mm.
And so my psychologist, when I told her, oh, I was asexual before that, and she was just like, yeah, that's normal for CSA survivors. And I'm like, excuse me?
Mm.
And she was just like, yeah, that's normal for CSA survivors. It's like, and I was just like, oh, so there is no point at which I will ever know what would like my natural sexuality have been like, because everything has been a trauma response to something else,
Wow.
and at this point, the persona Asugara, who was created, she narrates like half of Freshwater.
Yeah.
She's a different person. She has different pronouns. She has a different personality. She's not as nice as me, not as sweet and cuddly, just a very different person. And she's still currently in my like multiple system. There's 7 selves.
Wow.
4 of them are children. And out of all 7, she is the only one who has any kind, like who is, what's the word? The opposite of asexual, allosexual.
What is that again?
So it's like
Asexual.
there's asexual and then there's allosexual. It's ALLO. And it's basically like people who are not asexual.
Right. Got it. I don't think
So
I've
it's kind
heard
of like
that term
transgender,
before.
cisgender, asexual,
Right.
allosexual. She's the only one who's allosexual, and she's not around most of the time. So in the combination, and this is like, again, part of why I'm like, I do so much work on the interior self is because there's 7.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm just like, no, it takes that much work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of therapy. It takes a lot of like, you have to unpack the trauma, for each person. But when you take like the average, you take like the average to get like the average Akwaeke, you kind of end up with like a demisexual person where it's like, oh, I'm not at all interested until I am interested, and then I'm somebody else. But if I'm not that person, then I'm not interested.
Who is that person? The else? I'm someone else when I am interested.
Asugara,
Got it.
yeah, the persona who was created. And so it makes it really interesting to write sex scenes in books.
Yes, tell
Because
me.
most of the time I'm just like, it's just flesh. It's just,
Yeah.
it's just.
But you write
humans
them
are
so
so
well,
fleshy.
so you need to break that down because it's not like they're quick. I was like on page 2, like, when is this over? Because I'm like maybe wet right now and it's uncomfortable.
I think a lot of it is, part of the work of craft is writing whether you feel like it or not. So it's like writing whether you're in the mood or not. And it has nothing to do with like sex scenes because it applies to everything else. I had this young adult novel, Bitter, that is about the revolution and the role of artists in the revolution and the guilt of not being on the front lines of the revolution and feeling like making art is inadequate. And it's like, it's a YA novel. It's about like a teenager who's dealing with all these questions and watching, her friends and classmates be on the front lines and be out in the street, and she can't do it because she has severe anxiety and freaks her out and she just doesn't want to, and all of this. But I wrote that book. I remember I was editing it or writing it the summer of 2020. And I did not feel like writing about the revolution while people were literally out there like suffering on the streets. Toyin Salo was killed while I was writing the book.
Wow.
So the book's dedicated to her. And it was just really painful to be writing about this world as it was kind of playing out in real time. I did not want to write it. I didn't feel like it. I didn't feel hopeful at all.
Right.
You know, the messages that I was trying to put in the book, I could not relate to them whatsoever.
Wow.
And I was worried that the book was going to suck because of it. But then when I read it later, I was like, thank God for discipline and craft. Because you couldn't tell. You couldn't tell how I felt at all while writing it. And I was like, and that's what makes it a job.
Yes.
You know, my job was to communicate a thing completely regardless of my personal feelings at the time and to do a good job. And so I feel like that's kind of why that's where the craft comes in. So even with the sex scenes and the romance and it has, at the end of the day, nothing to do with me personally, because I'm not writing those stories as myself or even for myself. You know, when I write Galilee and Lucifer in Son of the Morning, I'm writing for them. So I don't need to think about like my feelings. I'm not attracted to them. They are attracted to each other. It's a bit like shape-shifting, I think. You know, I slip into their skin and I write for them and they tell me how it feels and I transcribe it. Even if I'm personally like, fluids, bodily fluids.
That's so amazing.
But they're like, fluids, bodily fluids. And I'm just like, sure, okay.
Oh my God.
I'll write it the way you want me to write it.
When you are almost so experiencing these realms so fluidly, how does one sort? Like, how does one find that discernment of where to put what? Because I imagine for a lot of life, it's not that simple.
I think for me, it didn't really occur to me that it would be hard for other people to become the stories of themselves, because that's what I did. I was like, I became the story of myself. Like the little the little biography I wrote for myself when I was 7, I became that. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So become that. And one of my friends, we were talking about, in my work, I often talk about being like literally named as the child of a deity. And if you are the child of a deity, you are a deity yourself, but a deity in an indigenous sense, which is literally just an entity with great power who serves a community. It's not hierarchical in a Western sense. It's just like you have a lot of spiritual power. You are a specific type of entity. You're here to serve a community. Great. And so I had a friend who once sent me this gospel song, this Igbo gospel song. And she was like, oh, this is you. Like, this is like your God name. And it was Ekweme, which means the one who does what they say they will. The song is beautiful. It speaks in Igbo proverbs. It's basically just like the power to say something and make it happen. And that is, I think, one of the greatest, like, fundamental truths about me is that I do what I say I'm going to do. When I decide to do a thing, it's going to happen. And I was once told that it was because of the placement of my Mercury and my Mars.
Yeah, they're conjunct. Your natal Mars, which is your chart ruler, is in Cancer. And, you know, Mars exalts in the opposite sign of Capricorn. So it's interesting to think of Mars in Cancer because it's technically in exile. And my chart ruler is also in exile. And
hey, exiled.
Yeah, exiled Marses. And I think one of my favorite generative kind of outcomes of having your chart ruler in exile is that it creates like a inverted way of dealing with things that for other people would be the obvious route. And when you have your chart ruler in detriment, it's like you see all these other openings and paths. And sometimes it can feel like you're more in a circular journey when it comes to those planetary things like desire or taking initiative, which is not something you struggle with because of the way that your Mars is aspected. All the things you just said to me were kind of like summed up the spiritual self-portraiture of that kind of signature of like Cancer being the memory keeper, the emotional historian, a lot of the rememory work as like a head nod to Tony and thinking about like how to put language to these or express these hauntings. But I think that was a beautiful way of also finding affirmation of love through loss and the kind of the generative relationship between those two. And Cancers really do collect memories. And that's why I thought of the invisible architecture, because I feel like so much of your chart is actually honoring what isn't seen and is still deeply felt. And not only is it deeply felt, but it's shaped who you are and it's constantly shaping who you are. And so I think that's like a beautiful combination of the Cancer emotional historian and archivist that is archiving the memories that are also invisible, the ones that we don't find written down. And I'm so invested in invisible architectures because we're now in a moment where preservation in a documented form is really important. And we all know why it's important. I also want to give voice to the non-renewable resources like our secrets and our gossips and our stories that we are going to be really discerning about not writing down, because we know what happens when we write things down too, which is that we become capturable and we become trackable. I am curious about like what are those like re-memories that are feeling alive in you right now?
I think a lot of it is about magic. In doing like parts work, like parts therapy, and dealing with a lot of like childhood trauma, you talk a lot to like the kid versions of you. I have 4 of them. So, and they're like different kids, with different aspects and doing different things. But one of the things we had figured out in therapy was that at some point in my childhood, I had been punished so much for being myself. I was a very loud, very bright child, and my family found it really annoying, and so I was conditioned throughout my childhood to like that the light that I had was a problem, you know, that just existing as myself was considered violence because it made people feel smaller. It was like, oh, just you being yourself makes people feel insecure, makes them resent you, makes them feel like, oh, you think you're better than them. And when you're telling that to like a very young child, it was like, oh, okay. So the problem is me. I'm too shiny. I'm too much. I'm too big. I'm too bright. So I need to turn down everything. I need to excise the part of me that is light and bright and shiny. I need to become quieter because that is the only way I'm going to be loved. And so in emptying out all that junk as an adult, right? Cleaning all that up and trying to get back to what are you? I had a really hard time because I kept telling like, the littles, I was just like, oh, well, you're this, you're that. And they didn't believe me. They were just like, no. And then I had an epiphany in one of my like counseling sessions, like spiritual counseling. And it was like, oh, you're trying to teach them not to internalize other people's stories about them. That includes you.
Right.
So instead of you telling them what they are, have you tried asking them what they are?
That's a powerful shift. Right.
It was such a huge shift. And so I asked, and the little like kid version of me looked up, said one word, just said magic, and ran away. And I was like, wait, what?
Excuse you, come back here.
I was like, get back here, explain yourself.
Explain yourself.
But
they don't want to. That's the one word. Yeah.
It made so much sense. So much of my work is about like Black Indigenous realities being real. And that includes magic, and that includes spirits. And it doesn't matter what terms or language, whether you call them fairies. We only call them fairies because we were reading British children's literature. If we had a different word, we would have used a different word. But all those things are real. And I think that informs where my work is going now, because I'm writing predominantly fantasy at this point. Like the book I'm working on is coming out next year and is my first like adult fantasy novel. It's not a romance novel. It's like a very long fantasy novel. And I have an 8-book series mapped out that's like West African fantasy based in indigenous, realities that I've been working on since I was 14 is when I actually started drafting that series. And I think there's something there about these two paths kind of joining, like the work and the life, where the common thing you're seeing there is that magic is real.
I would love to end, though, on plugging Son of the Morning, November 4th. And then what else? How else can folks stay connected to you and your work?
I'm not on Twitter anymore. I am on Instagram and I am on TikTok. Interestingly, I'm actually still on Tumblr.
Yes, as you should be.
Because I just love it. It's such a lovely little strange place. And yeah, and I have a newsletter that you can access from my website, which is awaeke.com.
Yes. And it's beautiful.
And it's honestly, I send out a newsletter. It's been like once or twice a year. It's not frequent. But there are a lot of more books coming out. There's another book coming out next year. There will probably be 3, 4 more books rolling out in the years after that. So the books are just gonna keep churning out. I'm very excited for Son of the Morning. I think, yes, it's a romance novel, but I think there's a lot in there about like blasphemy and questioning existing religious stories that we've been told about who's the bad guy and who's not. And when you learn how to question those religious authorities and those stories, I think that's an important step towards, self-determination. Um, and figuring out some things. So yeah, and also I hope people enjoy it. It was a really fun book for me to write, and I like that it is a different kind of vehicle for my thinking. It's also about like love, obviously, because it's a romance, but it's also like the kind of love when you are a terrifying entity and what it is like to find another terrifying entity who delights in how terrifying you are, which is like
I'm
a
turned
bit of
on
fan fiction
again.
on my part. I'm just like, let me manifest it by writing about the devil.
I love it. That was Akwaeke, who is a Gemini sun. As always, to end the show, I want to leave you with some key takeaways we can all benefit from, inspired by our stars chart. So, what stayed with me the most from today's conversation with Akwaeke is how their chart tells the story of someone who builds worlds to belong to. With their Libra moon shining in the 12th house, which is the house of dreams, the unconscious, and what is hidden, intertwined with their aspects to Neptune, the planet of illusions and spirituality, Akwaeke carries that signature of the dreamer. They are someone highly attuned to other realms, where magic is not just metaphor, but memory. We talked about how compounding trauma can sometimes make imagination a form of survival. How the 12th house in particular teaches us to slip between worlds when the one we're in feels too small or unsafe. And yet, in Akwaeke's case, that same portal becomes a source of power. Their creative work transforms escape into expansion. It's a beautiful reminder that our art, our stories, and our spiritual practices can serve as bridges, linking our inner dreamscapes with the tangible world. Akwaeke shows us that imagination isn't avoidance, it's architecture. Through their writing, they're not just describing worlds, they're building them and inviting all of us to step inside. Well, that's it for our download from the cosmos this week. If you liked today's episode, please leave a comment to keep the conversation going. Hit that subscribe button. And remember, we're live on YouTube every Wednesday answering your cosmic questions. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next week.